Great. So welcome, everyone. We will start the presentation momentarily. Just wanted to ask those who join to put your name and affiliation in the chat and whether you have applied for federal or state grants before. If you have questions as we go along, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Margaret will be monitoring the chat, and if there's something that we need to clarify as we speak, we will do so. Otherwise, we'll certainly use the chat to help guide the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So I'll get started on the presentation and we'll go from there. Great. So if you're here for grant writing, common reasons proposals fail, you are in the right place. I'm Karen Pelto. I'm the Recovery Grant Specialist for Berkshire Funding Focus. And I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Margaret Crome, who is the Policy Program Director for the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute in Wisconsin. And we both bring decades of experience to federal and state grant writing, reporting, et cetera. And we're happy to share this webinar and our perspectives with you. Just in terms of introduction for folks in the Berkshires, Berkshire Funding Focus, or BFF, as I'll refer to it, was established in 2022 to support our cities and towns, nonprofits, schools, and small businesses that are seeking federal and state funds either for pandemic-related recovery or for building capacity and programming in the long term. Our approach are the 4 C's. First, we curate opportunities. We put them on our website. We have a weekly e-newsletter, the first 5. And if I have met with you and have a sense of what you're looking for, I will also send you items of likely interest to you. We help build the capacity through workshops such as these. We will be actually scheduling an entire spring of workshops, so I will certainly keep you informed as those dates get confirmed. We convene partners together for grants that either require partnerships or would benefit from partnerships to make them more competitive. And we are your free consultant. You can reach out to me via email or phone or meet with me with any questions you have about grant searching, grant writing, grant reporting, grant management. And to dive right into the reason we're here, reason number 1 as to why a proposal might fail is the proposed project is not a priority topic to the grant-making agency. This quote I take to heart, and I think you should as well. Successful grant writers assess what a proposed project has to offer, understand what a grant-making agency wants, and communicate a clear match between the two. And when it comes to federal agencies, they will issue federal notices of funding opportunity, or NOFOs, or sometimes funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, or other various acronyms. And in those documents, they will basically give you the Rosetta Stone for what the agency wants. The first is they will cite their statutory and regulatory authority. These are just some examples, like the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, the Infrastructure Act, or longstanding laws like the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act. They will also refer to their plans, policies, and programs. In many cases, they will list the president's executive orders that are guiding this funding opportunity. The departments themselves may have strategic plans, equity action plans, and then they have program goals and objectives. And I particularly want you to take home this message, because what you will see in the NOFO or in the FOA is a statement like this. And this is an actual statement. The investments EPA makes through the community change grants are intended to achieve the following objectives. And the key word there is investments. The agency is making investments to achieve these objectives, policies, programs, to make sure they implement that authority. And they are going to be very clear about what objectives they're looking to achieve. So your proposal should also meet one or more of those objectives and be very clear about how you can meet them and help the agency meet fund what it needs to do. There are also initiatives that will be stated. Under the Biden administration, the Justice 40 initiative specifies that certain grant programs should invest 40% of their funding or make sure 40% of the benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. And they'll give you a link that will show you for that particular agency what they consider a disadvantaged community. And you can look on the map and see if it's in the area of your project. And one you'll hear over and over again is avoiding risk. The agency wants to know, are you ready? Is your project ready? And do you have the capacity to deliver that project? Are you very conversant in the constraints and obstacles that you might face and how to overcome them? And do you have experience with federal grants? This one's very important. If you haven't, then a partnership grant might be better for you, where you then become a sub-awardee under a federal grant and can build that experience. It's also possible if you have administered ARPA funds that came through your city or town as in a form of a grant, that you can show you have that experience because ARPA is federal money and all those requirements flowed down from the federal agency to your city or town and all the way down to you. When it comes to the state, you will see requests for responses or requests for proposals, but you'll see similar types of items listed there. Again, they will indicate their statutory and regulatory authority. What can become complicated here is that there are many grants now that operate under both federal authority and state authority because they are federal funds flowing through the state in the form of a grant. Sometimes it's state-only funding, and that makes things simpler. But one example I want to share with you as to why this is so important was a grant that the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources administered with federal funds over the past couple of fiscal years. In the first fiscal year, the funding came through ARPA. And in the second fiscal year, it came through a different statutory authority that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has. ARPA allowed applicants to include administrative costs in their budget, but the second legislative authority, this Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act, did not. And so if you applied the first year, you were likely puzzled as to why you couldn't include it, but it's all because of the statutory authority that the funding came through. State agencies also have governor's executive orders. This is one of the more recent ones under Governor Healy. I want to introduce you to the Massachusetts 5-year capital plan. Massachusetts not only has an annual operating budget, it also has a capital budget. And these are bonds that the state issues to fund environmental projects, transportation projects, housing projects. And the state as a whole has a 5-year capital plan, and each agency has a 5-year capital plan. It's good to get familiar with that because sometimes the state is going to spend the money itself through, contracting to build something or to buy something, but often they're going to implement this capital plan through grants, and understanding that is really important. State agencies also have their own action plans, economic development plans. You'll see sustainable development principles cited quite frequently. And then each agency also has its program goals and objectives. Again, they're making investments to achieve these, investments in you to help them achieve these. The state has its own initiatives. Governor Healy has continued the Life Sciences Initiative. She's also launched Resilient Lands Initiative and others. And again, avoiding risk. And you'll see that appear again and again. Reason number 2, the project need or rationale for your proposed approach as the best solution to a problem is missing or not well thought out. The Minnesota grantmakers put it very well. Describe a problem that is about the same size as your solution. Don't draw a dark picture of nuclear war, teen suicide, and lethal air pollution if you are planning a modest neighborhood arts program for children. You want to make your proposal convincing and compelling at its scale. You must document why the need or problem is important, not just to you, but to the funding agency. It may be self-evident to you, but it's not to the reviewer. Make your case in human terms if you have qualitative data, storytelling, case studies, and factual terms, quantitative data, research studies, even if it's data and research by others, as long as it's relevant to your project. I want to also emphasize that the agency is only allowed to review what you submit to them in your proposal package. They're not going to look at your website. They're not going to look at your annual report. It's a level playing field. Each proposal has to be reviewed on its own merits. And so therefore, you need to make sure it's complete. Don't think they already know it or can find out. Your approach must follow logically from the need or the problem. Have you done previous work? Have others done previous work that lead you to this approach? And are you building on what's already been accomplished? And while funders will often express that they're looking for innovation, they're looking for creativity, they're looking for new solutions, they're also looking to minimize risk. So they also need to know, and you need to show evidence for why your approach is feasible and likely to succeed. Even if you're proposing something brand new, there's no doubt that elements of it have been shown by others to be successful, and you need to really make that very clear. And again, match the need and the problem to the rationale and the rationale and solution to the context of your geographic focus. Are you working at the neighborhood, town, city, county, or state level? Make sure that all of your data, all of your narrative, all of your solutions are scaled to the focus area that you are working on. And when it comes to federal and state grants, it's all about the points. I highly recommend putting right up next to each other the content that the agency is looking for in the proposal and the criteria by which they will evaluate it. I worked for many years with a fantastic capital project procurement person at the state, and he always said, the agency cannot ask you for something it won't score you on, and it can't score you on something it doesn't ask you for. So you really need to compare these two. And one of the things that you might note is that the agency might give you more clues in the criteria about what it's going to place more emphasis on in terms of the content it's asked you for. And if they're placing more emphasis on or giving more points to a certain element, you want to make sure that yours is as clear and complete as it can be to make sure you get those points. And reason number 3 has to do with your budget. It's unrealistically high or low, or is not well justified, and the costs appear greater than the benefits. The U.S. Department of Justice has a great Grants 101 website, and a well-prepared budget should be reasonable and demonstrate that the funds being asked for will be used wisely. Again, risk reduction. The budget should be as concrete and specific as possible in its estimates. Make every effort to be realistic, to estimate costs accurately. You want to make your budget convincing and consistent. And don't start at the end. Don't read ahead, so to speak. The maximum grant award is a ceiling, not a target. Your budget must align with the scale and scope of your project and its expected benefits or outcomes. I was in an excellent grant webinar where the agency said, we don't want to see any round numbers. If we see round numbers, we know that this is a guess and you can't justify it. And so they made it very clear they wanted things practically to the penny, because then they knew that you understood what the true cost of your project would be. Get quotes or estimates for the project elements such as supplies, equipment, contractual services. And just a note, when it comes to federal grants, the difference between supplies and equipment is just how much they cost, no matter how you plan to use it. And your budget must be consistent with your project or program narrative. If you propose an activity or task, it must be reflected in the budget. Even if it's an activity or task that you are either have other funding for or you're not asking for funding, it needs to be in the budget and identified as either in kind or no cost to the agency but covered by others. And don't restate your narrative in the budget justification. The budget justification is for showing your math. It's not about convincing the agency that it's important you get money. That's what the rest of your proposal is for. And so an example is, say you have the budget category of personnel, and your project director is going to be someone that you seek funding for. You need to describe what the project director is going to do as part of the grant, not their job description, not how qualified they are, that'll be in other sections, but what they're going to do under this grant. And then you need to show varying levels of specificity. In this case, the funder wanted to know what the salary was, what the percent effort was, how long the project would take, and how many, and the funds that you were requesting based on that level of effort. And that what they're going to look for here is are the activities that your project director doing really match their level of effort? And is the cost reasonable? Is this the kind of salary that would be typical for a project director for this type of project? So they are looking for the kind of detail to determine if your budget is reasonable, justified, and complete. And I'm going to turn things over to Margaret for the
Great.
rest of our
And I'm just going to pause for a second and go back to that budget thing and note one point is that in many federal grants, they want to know two things. They want to know what your objectives are, and sometimes they want budgets in two forms. They want to have you articulate the budget per objective, and then they want to have you have an expense budget. So don't be thrown off by that if that happens. It's perfectly okay. Second point related to that goes back to something that Karen said earlier, which is about reading that call for proposals many times. Because one thing you'll discover is if you have applied to one federal program before and you think, well, I've done it, now I know what to expect, don't be shocked. Every program really is different. It's got its own culture, it's got its own lawyers, and it has different expectations and guidelines. There are some general ones that we're sharing, but every single program is going to be a little bit different, sometimes considerably different. And its review process may be different, its expectations, the points that they allocate for different parts of your proposal. So read it several times. So on we go to the next reason that sometimes proposals don't get funded. So the next slide. So reviewers might say, you didn't explain your methods well enough. They're not justified effectively. Maybe they don't seem like they make sense for this project, or the personnel aren't qualified to undertake those methods. So you, first of all, you've explained what the process, what it is that's important that you're doing in your proposal. What is in your project? What is it, the thing that you're undertaking, why it's important? And then you're going to say, so what are we actually going to do and why? Are we going to do it this way? And I generally think it makes sense to start with the same kind of logic that I apply to myself and to our kids and husband. Anytime we're making a big decision, we say, don't just assume that the first idea that's come to your mind for how to accomplish something is the best idea. Push yourself to identify other strategies you might use. And then go back and assess what strategy makes the most sense. Often you'll be doing this with a team because you might find there are other people motivated by that same initiative, that same goal, those same objectives. And you may do this together, but figure out what are the different ways you could accomplish a thing, and then which one is the most appropriate for each circumstance. Explain that logic, why you chose these methods, and then make sure you're explaining why it is that the particular people that you're identifying in the proposal who are going to be helping to lead it and undertake the project, why are they so particularly well suited for this? Do they have the, fundamentally the experience and the excitement and the commitment, and what are their particular qualifications? Be sure to explain that and how well they are going to execute the methods that you've chosen. Okay. Another reason sometimes proposals don't get funded are, it comes down to kind of you could say the logistics. It's just like, the thing wasn't complete. The guidelines weren't exactly followed correctly. Maybe the content wasn't just exactly what they asked for. The format wasn't right. The length wasn't right. Increasingly, as a lot of applications have you go online and use an automated format. the format issue becomes less of an issue, but it's still, there are plenty of federal programs where you write it out and submit the document, and without going within their own format, within their own, what am I trying to, like the fill in the blank approach, where they give you word length and stuff, and they'll cut you off if you go too long. There still are plenty where you're expected to figure it out and make sure you do exactly the right thing. So some of the obvious remedies here are, again, reading that call for proposals several times. The first time you read it, you're going to find it very off-putting, I predict. And I would be quite surprised if those of you who have written proposals before, many of you said in the chat that you have written proposals before. And I would be surprised if any of you said that that's the thing you really want to do on a Friday night when you're really settling in for fun. It is usually kind of densely written. Sometimes it seems internally contradictory. Usually it's very small print, exasperating sometimes. So you read it the first time and accommodate yourself to what the general thing it's trying to get done. It's going to tell you the essence, and you might take a little highlighter and note a few things that are going to be important. Oh yeah, that's important for me to see. Yeah, this is a fit. Yep. No, it doesn't make sense here. This call for proposals, we are really well suited for what they're trying to get done. You read that several times, and then you make sure as you read it the second time, you begin thinking very practically about what you're wanting to get done, how you're going to get it done. Start taking notes and developing a kind of an outline. And then I would say the third time is sort of the sweep. It's the time to go back. I usually say to people, get a cup of coffee if you're a coffee drinker, get a nice chocolate muffin or something that will get you through it. Give yourself a little break, and then get through it, but really do read it. I can honestly say, as a grant reviewer, probably the single biggest factor in reviewing proposals, you can almost always tell where people haven't actually read the proposal very carefully. It's super obvious. And I just think, boy, this single truth is going to get you a lot farther than you might suppose. And I love this as a little quote that Karen found here that's in the right-hand side here. The 3 simple steps: read the application instructions carefully. And then number 2, read the application instructions carefully. And don't forget, read them carefully. And it's true. You'd be shocked at how many people don't bother. If you simply do that one important thing, you will have a leg up. And don't forget, as you're doing that and reading the instructions and following it, don't forget or minimize the importance of some of the places that people sometimes seem to go a little light on, like the monitoring and evaluation. Most calls for proposals ask for an evaluation plan. How will they know you've been successful? How will you know? Also, any data management plans. If there are any kind of requirements, NEPA requirements, you definitely want to give yourself the time to get good letters of commitment. Usually I'll just say that if they ask for a letter of support, imagine that they've asked for a letter of commitment. Because in fact, if you're a reviewer looking at 2 letters, and one of them says, this is a good proposal, this is an important thing, I support it, please fund it, versus this is a good proposal, it's very important work, I support it, and here's my commitment to making it go forward successfully. Here's what my organization or I personally am going to commit to. That second one is an obviously stronger letter. And those letters of commitment, sometimes I've certainly been on review panels where the letters of commitment were almost as important as the grant proposal itself, because in those letters, people were able to communicate a lot of what you want to in the proposal. It communicates why it matters, how committed the community is to this. So I never send out to people a just fill in the blank letter of commitment. I actually tailor. If when I call up somebody, would you be willing to write a letter of commitment, or email them and they say yes, I say, would you like to have me send you some thinking points, or would you like to have me draft something that you can feel free to change and put in your own words? I would say about 98.5% of the time people say, oh, please draft it for me. And I don't draft everyone the same way. I try to do it from their point of view. so that they are helping you make your argument why this is such a good proposal. So those can take some time, give it that time. And then, of course, understand that you want to get all of the elements of the proposal very thoughtfully laid out. And I don't know, I find people tend to be a little bit more fearful of this process than they need to be. Partly they're just not clear all of what has to get done, and they don't have it systematically organized. So one of the things that you can do is to, if you'll change the slide, I'll give you an example of a spreadsheet. I did this, I changed the names on this, but it was a proposal that we were putting in, and we were working with some collaborators on it. And we literally just walked through the call for proposals and said, they want a cover sheet, they want a project summary, they want project objectives and outcomes, background, da, 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 da. And everything at the beginning started out red. When you see that pink, what that is actually indicating is that nothing's been done on this thing yet. Nobody's dealt with it. And then if you come across the top line there, you'll see who we have different people who are committing to get a thing done. Well, it turns out actually that cover one was green because it was autofilled from the pre-proposal. The project objectives, it is done. We got that done. So-and-so added some notes. We considered adjusting it. So Joan is taking care of the background rationale. And as soon as Joan has gotten started, you can say, ooh, okay, we're going to change that to a yellow. And that way everybody on this project who's working on this proposal can simultaneously look and see on this spreadsheet as things shift from red to yellow and yellow to green. And what is the date by when it's going to get done? It lets everybody remember what their deadlines are. And if there's some things that have made it hard, it's useful for people. So that's, everybody else can kind of chime in and go, oh, I should be calling so-and-so because they're seeming to be having a hard time on that one. So it's a way of communicating and kind of watching the process go forward in in an expedited way. On we go to the next slide. I'll just say one thing. And we were asked by a group in South Georgia last year to help get a proposal out, and we used this process. And it was simply fascinating to see how grateful the community was for that sense of organization. It's like it gave them guide rails all along the way, that nobody felt scared. They're like, I know what I'm supposed to do. And I can see how we're functioning as a team. And the more green it got, every time we had a meeting, the greener it got. We were practically a cheering crowd. And I'm happy to tell you the group did indeed get their grant. So it was a process that they doing because it gave everybody some confidence and some agency. So one more reason that sometimes proposals don't get funded. And I loved, Leslie, your comment in there. You'd like to meet the person who's gotten funded every single proposal that they've written. I appreciate that. That would be what I would say too. Doesn't happen unless you've merely written one proposal and you got it. But if you're going to write proposals, you're not going to get every one. So one of the other reasons they may not all get funded, it may not always get funded, is if it's hard to read, poorly organized, makes sweeping generalizations or illogical statements, it's excessively repetitious, or it's too long. So readability, compelling narrative, clarity, understandability, these things really matter. And of course, you're going to just start by following the call for proposals instructions for the format and the content, and for the proposal and for the budget narratives. As Karen mentioned earlier, the budget narrative isn't the same thing. You don't write it the same way. And often there's some very specific instructions about what they do want and don't want. Make sure you're really just following those clearly. And then understand the difference. Some agencies here will have different expectations about how they're going to have you submit. And if they're using these portals, they might give you a template, but they also will give you some text boxes in which you can put your proposal, and you have to meet those length requirements. I was doing a workshop way back on grant writing, way back in the second half of the 90s down in Louisiana. And I can remember a gentleman in the workshop saying, you know, I like big words. And my heart sank. And I thought, oh no, you will not dazzle them with fancy language. Make it clear, make it understandable. You will not be downgraded because it's clear. You may be downgraded because you're using language inappropriately or people don't understand it. Or if you're using acronyms, they don't understand what the acronyms are. If you must use an acronym, please be sure to explain it the first time you use it, but don't use them unless you must. Understand the agency's terminology. There's different agencies and different terrain have different ways of framing what they consider to be the work at the work field at play, and make sure you're using the language that will be understood by the agency and the reviewers reviewing. I think it helps, if you possibly can, to have somebody else review your draft. If you're working within a team, and you have other people who are partners with you on getting that proposal out the door and will be working on project implementation should you get the grant, then have them help you review it. Sometimes people just feel kind of insecure about their English and they want somebody to work on grammar. That's great, but it's really helpful to make sure you have people looking not just at the grammar and the logistics, but also the logic. Does this make sense? And I will say maybe Karen wants to be the person who says with a trumpet here that you all are able to serve as a reviewer. So you want to elaborate on that in any way? Berkshire Funding Focus can be a reviewer for you if you get it to them in time, which is to say at least a week before you're going to submit it. So Karen, you want to elaborate on that in any way?
Sure. I guess I want to say a couple things. One is I always tell people I'm fluent in bureaucrat. And so I can really help you make sure you're speaking the agency's language and responding to their criteria. And that my review is primarily from the point of view of maximizing your points and indicating where you can strengthen the proposal to score more highly.
Great. Thank you. Maria earlier asked a question in the chat. Could we explain the level of effort? Happy to, and the level of effort with regard to which component of this work, Maria?
I guess when it was in the little budget, I guess I didn't understand what it means. Like it says level of effort 25%. Like what does it mean exactly?
So when thank you very much, because it is a term that you'll see quite often in federal and state grant solicitations. And so what they want to know is how much time is this person going to be spending on this project if funded through this grant? So they're looking for, oh, you know, is it going to be, so what's helpful to you as the applicant is to think about maybe how many hours a week do you think they'll be spending on this project or this program? And then, you know, based on how many hours a week they work, let's say they're going to spend 10 hours a week and they work a 40-hour week. So that would be, you know, 25% level of effort. So think about it that way, as sort of like how much time are they going to be spending, and therefore how much are you going to ask to help pay them to do it?
Thank you. Why don't you move to the next slide? So this is related to the previous concern, which is sometimes the proposal just isn't absolutely clear in describing one or more of its elements. So it's not just grammar, style, and format. As I was just saying, it's also the logic and the clarity of the content. And be aware that sometimes there are going to be parts of the proposal that just give you the willies a little bit, that make you a little bit uneasy. And you don't notice that you're sort of avoiding them, but you might have kind of gotten over general and not gotten specific enough. So go back and make sure you've pushed yourself to be clear about things like evaluation and monitoring and any elements that you think might not be completely clear, or that your reviewers, if you have gotten time to have your reviewers look it over. Sometimes I've been asked to review proposals and it came like 2 days before it was due. And I had that heartbreaking experience of thinking, oh my goodness, there's a very elemental problem here, which is you haven't made a case for why the approach that you're using is going to lead to the outcomes you're hoping for. And it was so fundamental that there was no chance that they could fix that in time. And I can think of at least a couple of grants where it was, I got back to them as quickly as I could to say that. And I said, another time, let me know ahead. I'm happy to work with you to think it through. But they didn't get the proposal. I was sure they wouldn't, because the grant, because they didn't connect those dots. And that's what a good reviewer can help you do. And part of what Karen is offering to have BFF help you do. So absolutely take them up on it. This is the last point here, is just a kind of a goofy one, but honestly, it's so important. I don't live my life wanting to be paranoid. I don't want to spend my time in like the throes of anxiety, but it is kind of useful to finish the essence of your proposal and then ask yourself, what is it that's nagging in the back of my head about this thing? I had a proposal I was telling Karen about several years ago. When our children were little, we had a small outdoor classroom that we were building at our school. And it just suddenly struck me, this school is in a wealthier neighborhood of the city. It serves a widely diverse geographic and socioeconomic diversity of students. But it wouldn't be wise for us to be seeking money for staff for this. We'd better get that all as volunteers and donations. And we just looked for, the stuff of putting in an outdoor classroom. So we had all of the landscape design donated by the University of Wisconsin landscape architecture students. We had a local landscaper who came in, and as long as we were willing to post a sign out front saying that they had helped us, they did a lot of the earth moving. We got had all of the volunteers for implementing the work, but we needed some lumber, we needed soil, we needed paths, gravel for paths, and so forth. So we did stuff. I always say a project comes down to people, money, and stuff in your budget. And we didn't let people, we donated people. That was our match. That was my fretting experience, and it paid off. They really liked the fact, they let us know that they liked the fact that we matched with all of our time and other people's labor, and we only asked for stuff. Every single project and every proposal, you're going to have that moment of, uh-oh, I don't think that's quite going to fit. And if you give yourself enough time, then you can fret and fix the problem. So that's time, one more time. If there's a single Achilles heel in writing grant proposals, it's usually people didn't give themselves enough time. I think that's the last slide. Am I right? Yes.
Yes, indeed. And I encourage people to get in touch with any questions, visit our website. If you'd like to receive our weekly e-newsletter, the Berkshire First Five, you can pop it in the chat, pop your email in the chat. Well, I have your email. Let me know in the chat. Or you can send me an email, or you can go to our website and fill out the form. And I'm going to stop sharing so that we can open it up to questions for Margaret and myself.
And can I encourage people to come on their screens now and have a chance for some conversation? People, a number of you all have written proposals before. What would be your top piece of advice for others? What would you say has been your most distressing, I wish I hadn't done it that way, lesson learned? What has been your, oh, thank goodness I did this, triumph of success? What would you say are the stories that would be most helpful for others to have heard? Any painful stories or any happy stories?
I think like not giving ourselves like enough time has been like my experience, like procrastinating and kind of waiting at the last minute, and then it's like you just don't have enough time to make it better.
Yeah, I completely relate to you. I'm a deadline pusher, and I've learned that I better not be a deadline pusher on proposals. You are so right. Yeah, it's true. Anybody else? What have been your high water marks and your low water marks?
I'll share. It's not a tendency that I'm necessarily proud of, but like you shared about fretting over maybe that one question where like you're not really sure how to like answer it maybe, or maybe you don't have enough resources to answer it like thoroughly. That's something I will kind of like gloss over and maybe throw in a few more like sweeping statements rather than like taking the extra 30 minutes to maybe do a little extra research or whatever it needs to probably answer the question more accurately. So that's something I definitely struggle with.
Human nature, isn't it? Very good advice. I want to suggest one thing too, and that is, it was kind of implied, but it's worth saying again. When we've said, read that call for proposals at least 3 times. And also note that most agencies, not everyone, not for every call for proposals, but most, a tremendous number and an increasing number of calls for proposals have a webinar somewhere along the line where somebody explains, this is information that you should know. And it means you have a great place to go to get questions answered, often by other people, but if not, then you have a chance to ask it. And even if you can't make that webinar, very commonly they are recorded. And they sometimes get generated into or used to generate an FAQ, a frequently asked questions kind of sheet that's accompanying the call for proposals. But the last thing to say is, this is a difference between a philanthropic agency where the person whom you're working with is not only the person helping give information, but they also are helping to influence the decision. But with an agency, that person is really typically not the decider. Their job is to answer questions. And if you have not been able to understand something, you've read your call for proposals 3 times and you've looked at that webinar and you've thought, I'm still not clear, call the program staff. I often do these grant writing workshops that I do with program staff, and they practically get tears in their eyes when they describe how frustrating it is. Sorry, my husband's in the background sneezing. So sorry if you're hearing. It's my chorus. But people often say that it just kills them when somebody puts in a proposal and there's a thing that they could have gotten clarity on and they just didn't call me. They say, if only they called me, I could have guided them. So, don't be shy, but you have this terrific asset here in Karen and the Berkshire Funding Focus. And I gotta say, not every place in the country has that. So you should be taking advantage of this major asset that you've got.
Well, thank you. That's very humbling, but I absolutely am here to help. I have, nearly 30 years I worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts environmental agencies, and I was a funder. And so I absolutely hear what Margaret is saying about the frustration of a funder when people, we absolutely can tell when you haven't read the RFR and when you haven't asked questions. That said, I will say that another difference between a philanthropic funder and a state or federal funder is that once the solicitation is out for the world to see, once it's been posted, we can only answer clarifying questions about the RFR, about the program. We cannot answer any questions about project ideas you have that you've been thinking about. because that would unlevel the playing field for other applicants. So I encourage one of three things. One is if it's a grant program that comes up every year, get in touch with the program person ahead of the next solicitation. And, at that point, they are likely to be able to talk to you about potential ideas and what might fit and what might not. The second is, really understand so that during that question period, you are really focused on clarifying the RFR. And the third is, even if you've asked during the question period and they've posted a response and you still don't understand it, give me a call, because something to realize is that the program person, yes, has been very involved in writing that funding opportunity and writing that request for proposals, but so have their procurement attorneys. And so therefore, they are often not as clear as they'd like to be, because the attorney has made them add all kinds of language to that document to protect the agency's interest. And so as a result, it becomes very complicated. And even some of the answers they give you, you're like, what does this mean? And I've had a lot of people call me with that, and happy to help. But we always used to say that the cone of silence would descend. Once the RFR came out, the cone of silence was there, and we couldn't talk to you about your project at all anymore. So, get in early and get in often with the program directors so that you really understand what they're looking for. And something else people often don't do, and I really recommend doing, is that if you don't get funded, ask for a debrief. They're required to provide you a debrief. And they'll tell you why you didn't score highly in one area versus another, and what you can do to be successful next time. It's really helpful, and entirely your right to ask for that.
And a little bit similarly, if you have written a proposal previously to one agency and one program, don't assume that you should just take that and wholesale import it into another program's call for proposals. There will be differences, and you want to rethink it so that every time, if you submit the idea, again, no reason not to, but make sure every time you submit, the thing you actually submit doesn't look like it was last year's summer dress worn in the middle of the winter when you've grown a few pounds. Actually make it look like it's designed for exactly what you want. Exactly what they're asking for. What they're asking for. Make sure it's designed for what they want to have you answer. And so that is another one of those quirky mistakes. You can sometimes look at an application and you think, wow, you obviously followed some format, but it doesn't appear to be our format. Now, why is that? And it's probably because you've been turned down before and you're just submitting it in the kind of wild hope that maybe they won't notice. They'll notice. To make sure you retailer it. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Any other questions? Frustrations you've had? Things you would love to have Karen help you with?
One thing that I have learned from trial and error has been getting information into online systems. Sometimes they auto save, sometimes you can't save. So I'll have a working document, but I actually did make a mistake once where I didn't update the document that was online. And so it wasn't the same. And the funder reached out when we talked about it, but that's something that has been kind of challenging that I'm still trying to perfect a good procedure for, but I definitely think making, double checking. I know you both mentioned rereading the proposals, and I've tried to do that with revising the own grants, reading it 3 times over and having someone else look at it, because those little mistakes sometimes can just sneak right in. So
it's really true. I would say one thing that sometimes they recommend, and even if they don't, it's a good practice, I think, is I go through the proposal and I see what the either character length is or the word length is, whatever I'm allowed. And then I do it in either a Google Doc if we're collectively working on it, or in a Word doc if it's just me and my own application. And I hang on to that word length restriction, being very careful to understand whether if they have a word length or a character length, whether they include spaces in their count. That's important, because it can be that you think you've got the perfect word length, but in fact, oops, they were counting all those spaces in there. But then I have a good solid record of what I've done, and I can import that back into their document when I'm finally ready to go. And I have to say, it has helped me, because I have a proposal that I'm sorry to say, I looked at the thing that finally went in, and I looked at it and I thought, my gracious, I'm glad they overlooked that mistake. I don't know how it got in there, but it was not exactly what I had written. And somehow in the pasting in or the working it through, it didn't work properly. And I was like, ugh, how awkward. And you want to avoid those things. And that's my solution.
Yeah, and the first thing the agency is going to do is a completeness review. They're going to make sure everything they asked for, you actually gave to them, including every form, every attachment, everything. And only proposals that are deemed complete will move forward to the next level of review. Some agencies provide for what they call a curing period, where they will reach out to you and say, oh, we think you forgot to attach this. Can you send it? Some agencies don't. So that's also important to know when you're putting things together. And I will say, one of the other reasons to push yourself to start working on it early and read it as early as possible all the way through is a perfect example. Last spring, there was a grant for small businesses run by one of Massachusetts quasi-public agencies, and they asked for certificates of compliance from the Massachusetts Certificate of Good Standing, I should say, from the Massachusetts Secretary of State, where all businesses have to register. Now, the Secretary of State, ironically, is like their website and their processes are stuck decades ago. So you can, yes, request your certificate of good standing, but they mail it to you. And the grantor only had a month turnaround for applications. So if you didn't read that solicitation the minute it hit the street, you didn't have time to request your certificate and have it in hand to submit to the funder. So there are certain documents for businesses, for nonprofits, that you should always have in your back pocket. And so, for example, for nonprofits, it's not only that certificate of good standing, because nonprofit corporations also have to be registered with the Secretary of State, but also the letter of good standing from the Attorney General's Office Charity Division. So there are some documents that you can ask for annually and just have at the ready, so that when you see a grant opportunity, you've got it. But otherwise, you're going to be scrambling and dependent on someone else's slowness, which was very frustrating for a lot of small businesses who had never had to request that document before, didn't even know it existed until suddenly they had to have it.
It reminds me too of, at the federal level, if you don't already have a SAMS number, and you want to make sure you've got your ID and your SAMS number already lined up, because it's not that hard to do, but it can take longer than, there's an average and the average is a couple of weeks, but it can go from 1 week to a month and whatever. So you want to get that done early. So just go to grants.gov, which is the website you're going to love to hate. But on the other hand, it actually can walk you through what you need to do. And I encourage it. I shared a story last week with Karen that just the day before I had heard a proposal where I had been asked, would I be glad to be a subcontractor? And I'd written a letter of support, and apparently several others had as well. The colleague I was working with got everything ready and put together, but it went through another university's submissions office, and they neglected to attach all those letters of support. And this really great proposal got deemed incomplete, and they wouldn't reconsider. So last thought about timing is, keep in mind when you submit through a federal portal, through grants.gov, for example, don't submit the day of if you can possibly avoid it. I know I can think several years ago of a program within the Sustainable Ag World, which is the Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Grant Program. Here in the state of Wisconsin alone, I knew of 4 different entities who had submitted, And there had been a long queue that got jammed up, electronically speaking, because it was serving the Department of Defense and every other federal agency. And it just happened that was a congested period. Though they had submitted it in plenty of time, it did not get through the electronic review, through the electronic system. And we had 4 groups who had submitted proposals that did not get reviewed. So do it ahead of time and spare yourself the pain.
Absolutely. Well, we've come to the hour and a couple of folks had to leave. If anyone would like to stay and talk, we're happy to stay a few more minutes. If you are all set, we thank you very much for spending your lunch hour with us. And we've learned from you and we hope you've learned from us. And please definitely be in touch. Happy to help anytime.
Good luck, everybody.
Karen, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been at BFF for a few years now, and obviously, BFF became a resource in 2022. And I have to say it was so helpful because I've worked like in different cities and stuff, and there wasn't really that in Berkshire County. So I'm so glad, we've been able to, touch base, but thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. And let's meet sometime so I can keep an eye out for things for you.
Yes.
Once I get to know you better.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
I did have one question. I really appreciate the session and what I learned. I'm just wondering if I wanted to review this again as it's being recorded, how would I access this presentation?
Sure. So I'm going to post it on the Berkshire Funding Focus website, and I'll send a link to everyone who participated.
Okay, thank you so much. Should I write my email in the chat so you can access
I have it. If you
or-
registered, obviously you registered through Zoom. I have your email.
Okay, blessings. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You bet. Take care.
Bye.
And hold on, Margaret. I'm just going to stop